So Katie, we're really happy to have you, and we talk about ESL specific and kind of like early beginners for English, English for you know young learners who are getting started with English. But you've actually been teaching tons of different topics, and I know that you've been teaching classes where you read newspaper articles with students. And today you want to tell us more about how to ignite some interest in reading and writing with your students. And I guess the first question I wanted to ask you is this for only ESL teachers, or are we also talking with, about igniting an interest for reading and writing for native English speakers?
Yeah, so actually, I think a lot of what we're going to be talking about is relevant both for ESL students and for ELA, like English Language Arts, kids who are native English speakers, but also learning to read and write, which we all had to do ourselves in school as well. Actually, many of the classes I teach are not just for ESL students. I've taught a lot of the same classes with students who English is their first language, but they want to develop, more advanced reading skills or writing skills and the like. And I think it's something that's quite transferable and quite important for teachers to consider that the kids that they're teaching their language backgrounds, but also be aware that native English speakers also have to learn a lot of these skills as well.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Great. Well, we're so happy to have you, Katie. I'm going to let you take over and show us what you got.
Cool, thanks. Let me just share my screen.
Let me make sure I enabled
Send
it.
request.
Yeah, you should be good now.
Cool, thanks.
Are we going to be getting the recording?
Yes.
Okay, thank
we're
you.
recording this and I will share it on the Facebook group. Yes.
Awesome. Cool. Can everyone see my screen okay? Is it screen sharing?
Yep.
Awesome. Great. So yeah, hi everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me to come talk about storytelling skills with everyone here at Koala. I'm really excited to talk about this topic today. We're going to be talking a bit about how to use storytelling to develop reading and writing skills, and also how to make the reading a more enjoyable and fun process for a lot of our students. I've certainly had a few reluctant readers in the past, and I think, it's important for kids to see that reading is not just something they have to do in school, but also something they can genuinely enjoy doing as a hobby and as something that's going to help them and they can enjoy, going forward in their life as well. So as a quick introduction, hi, my name is Katie. You may know me as the director of Abridge Academy. I've been an online teacher since 2013. I've taught in the UK, China, and Japan before. I'm a qualified classroom teacher here in the UK, and I founded Abridge Academy back in 2020 to offer kind of interactive and digital teaching materials for online teachers. And these resources are initially aimed at the ESL market. We've had an increasing number of ELA teachers, like English Language Arts teachers, joining the curriculum and signing up for lessons as well. I will be talking a bit about the curriculum and some of those kind of lessons and things later on in today's webinar, but it's not just a sales pitch, don't worry. We're going to talk a bit at the beginning about different strategies to really engage kids in learning, in reading in particular, and also developing some of those storytelling and writing, sort of creative writing skills. So I want to start by just sort of introducing the kind of power of stories. And I think we can all kind of agree that from our own experiences, stories can make learning so much more engaging and memorable. We remember phrases and things from stories that we've read even as a child, all the way through into adulthood. There's also been a lot of research evidence that proves that kids who enjoy reading are doing better academically across all subject areas. So, reading is a really important skill. I can certainly say myself, having had kids who are struggling with their GCSE exams, for example, quite often it comes down to struggling with the reading side before they even got into the subject-specific knowledge. So, reading is a skill that is incredibly important for all learners. It also helps promote deeper understanding, critical thinking, analyzing texts and stories. And depending on what you're reading, hopefully a lot of these stories have a lot of good morals and they teach, kids how to develop empathy and feelings and appreciate people in different situations, for example, in these stories. And of course, it's boosting your English language and literature skills in an actual context that kids can, to some extent, relate to. So I think stories are incredibly powerful. But there are always those kids who don't quite enjoy reading as much as we do. And here are a few strategies and ideas to kind of foster that passion for reading in kids. And the first thing I would emphasize before I jump into these is that we shouldn't push reading as a chore for kids. And I think that's something perhaps some teachers, I've maybe been a little bit guilty of myself in the past, oh, we have to read, we've got our 15 minutes reading time every morning or something like that. And some kids feel that that pressure actually makes reading feel like a chore instead of something that's fun. So I want to talk about a few things we can do to make reading a bit more fun, particularly relating to online classes, although it is building also on my classroom teaching kind of background as well. So the first thing is to make reading more social and collaborative. I think most people here are probably Koalago users. And Koalago is fantastic for that sort of social learning. You can have multiple kids in the classroom all collaborating and enjoying things together. So you can be running a book club, for example. Many teachers want to get into teaching group classes, and a reading club is a fantastic way to start offering that. And if you don't want to do like a live book club, you can even have a sort of asynchronous, like a reading group chat or something, where you have all your students in a moderated group chat where they can post about what they're reading. You can give them little challenges and projects and things to do. They can write book reviews or something like that, and use it as an opportunity to get them talking about reading, even if they're not necessarily in a live class as well. And something I've also done with some of my students is assigning them reading buddies, where they partner up with someone else who's got similar kind of interest in terms of what they like to read and a similar sort of level. And they can share and recommend books with each other and sort of motivate and support each other in continuing to read. So yeah, encouraging kids to share and recommend and talk about books can be really powerful. Next kind of key strategy or whole, this is more kind of what you do in class itself, is to make reading much more creative and interactive. Sometimes it can be very tempting, I guess, when you've got like a big story to read, you just put the chapter up on the screen and they read through the text and then you answer some comprehension questions and that's it. But actually reading is not just about reading comprehension. Reading is also about engaging, being creative and enjoying that text as well. So you can do things like role play activities, get kids to draw a comic strip, like a storyboard of the main stages of the story. They can make little origami characters, particularly when it's like animal characters. My students really enjoy making little origami animals and then acting out, doing the story again with the little characters they've made. They create little models with things like Lego or with modeling clay or the like. Something I've seen a few other teachers do, this is something I'm really excited to try in my own classes soon, is getting kids to record their own videos acting out the story, maybe with little puppets or there are finger puppets and things with the ABH Academy story lessons I'll talk about a bit later. And that could be a great way to get them, maybe as a homework task, to reenact or sort of retell the story in their own words with little puppets and sort of cute actions. And then also encouraging them to think about their own story inspired by that one, or writing an alternative ending to the story, which is getting them to build on the book a bit further in a more creative kind of way. And I've got a few examples here of some things I've been doing with my students. So on the left, I think many people will recognize Koalago Playground as being an amazing place for building more immersive learning worlds. And you can create something that kind of like an immersive environment that looks very similar to the scenes in the story, and then you can role play, you can act out being the different characters. You can have the story text, as part of that playground, or you could just create it with your students live and get them to talk about, oh, well, what was the scene? Oh, it was a forest. Let's build a forest. And what else was in the forest? Oh, there was a wolf. Oh my goodness, where should we put the wolf? Start acting out and recreating that world with them together can be a lot of fun as well. The picture on the right here is one of my students who she made this really cute, it's out of modeling clay, some of the characters, and she kind of reenacted it with it's just a cardboard box with a bit of paper or something. She did this as a homework project. And then she made little modeling clay characters, and then she retold the story using these little characters. So kind of links in with those creative things that kids love, gets them to do a bit of art, a bit of fun kind of things, and all the while it's practicing kind of linking into the structure of the story and linking into understanding dialogue, understanding different feelings, understanding the stages of the story, that kind of thing. Okay, so I know I'm talking 100 miles an hour. I'm going to try and kind of get through a few core ideas and then jump into some more examples. Another thing that can be a lot of fun is making reading more competitive. I'm always a little bit wary of how much competition to impose, if that makes sense, because some kids get a bit intimidated by competition and it can be demotivating if you do it in the wrong way. But if you make it kind of fun, relaxed competition and you're giving awards for participation, that sort of thing, they can be a really great way to motivate kids. So you could do, for example, a reading bingo card. And there's a picture on the left here with a quick example of this, where you can give your students a challenge. Maybe this would work well as a sort of summer holiday kind of activity. And, they've got to try and cross off all the different examples on their bingo board. A reading race, first person to read 5 books this month wins a prize. A readathon, like who can read the most books, that kind of thing. Again, try not to put too much pressure on it, but it can be a great way just to have a little bit of fun and a little bit of challenge to stretch them a bit further. And the reading bingo one in particular works quite well in terms of getting them to diversify what they're reading as well. I find some students, they will just read one type of story because they've enjoyed one book, and then they'll think, okay, what other books are in the same sort of genre, the same sort of format, and they'll just read all of the books that are kind of the same one. And I can also remember myself as a kid, there were those sort of series of books where every single book was basically the same story, like the Pony Club books or whatever, which were great. But to encourage students to read a little bit more widely, encourage them to read, non-fiction, encourage them to listen to an audiobook. Maybe they can read a graphic novel. Maybe they read a book from a completely different continent, a different country, that kind of thing. So that gets them reading a wider range of things, discovering what else they might enjoy. Also during lessons themselves, I like doing quizzes and fun games and the like. Again, it's sort of gentle, fun competition. Maybe you can have a little celebration at the end of who got the highest score on the quiz and who won the board game activity you've got themed around that book, that kind of thing. And then I also like to give little certificates and award little prizes for kids who are, enjoying and participating in reading. Okay. And I kind of hinted a bit on this in the previous one, but giving kids kind of a choice of books and encourage them to read more variety of books can be a really great way to help them have fun. I think some students get put off reading because what they've been sort of forced to read in school was some big, boring or overly sort of daunting chapter book perhaps. And in reality, they really would engage much better with, say, a graphic novel. So giving them the choice of reading books that are in different formats or different genres. Some people love a good romance. Some kids enjoy like a big adventure story. Others like ones that are more sort of themed around things they can relate to. So there's a whole range of different sort of genres of books out there. So giving them a choice of options and encourage them to read more widely is really valuable. A link to that, let students actually choose the book. So when I have reading classes and like when there's a series of classes and I've got students kind of joining on an ongoing basis, I'll encourage them to recommend books they'd like us to read in the next session next week, because that's a great way to get them to talk about the books they already love, and then they also feel more involved in the decision process as well. And also finally, find books that are linked to their students' interests. Like if the student mentions they're really, really interested in tennis or something, see if you find a book that has a link to that particular hobby, because that could just be that small little thing that gets them to actually engage better with the book and then start to enjoy that process of reading again. Okay, so that was all about reading. But in today's webinar, I also wanted to touch a bit upon this idea of creative writing. And I actually think that reading and writing go incredibly well together, because kids who enjoy reading can then become inspired to start wanting to write their own stories or write things that are linked to that text that they've read. So something I've been doing with some of my students more recently is we'll read a story together. And we do this normal sort of analysis, the comprehension type stuff, role playing, all these sort of fun things you do around the guided reading sort of lesson. And then in our second lesson, we might then move on to sort of summarize or rewrite the story in their own words, or write a book review or something like that. It's getting them to write, but still very much about the original text. And then finally, we'll move on to them writing their own text that's been inspired by that story, but maybe with a different kind of twist. So actually, I think you can zoom in, there we go. So here, for example, we've got the hare and the tortoise, and we sort of decided to put a little bit of a twist on this story by rather than the tortoise being the good guy and the hare being the kind of lazy one, we're going to put a twist on this story, and instead the tortoise was being a bit too mean. It was actually really bad at running. I know the wrong way around. That was a previous example, another student. Anyway, change the story basically. Try and make the victim the villain, or maybe something unexpected happens. Like here we've got the hare saw an injured cat crying in a tree. Oh no, what's going to happen next? So kind of going through the students, planning like different structures to the story, planning what would happen if the situation changed. And in that way, they're going to write their own version of the story that's, completely different perhaps.
It's a good idea.
Or kind of linked to that would be like an alternative ending or something along those lines.
Yeah.
Sorry, was that a question?
There's just a comment from Saida who says, the problem I stumble into is that students don't spend time outside of class doing activities. It all has to be done in class.
Yeah, I found that some of my students, like, same kind of problem when it comes to like homework, for example, they don't really like doing things outside of the class time. I found if it's something they really are interested in, they might still be interested in doing it. Otherwise, it might help to kind of dedicate more class time to doing the activities you might otherwise be asking to do outside of class. So, for example, my student Chloe, the one who made the little scene with a bit of paper in the cardboard box and the little models, she did that herself at home. But we could have done that as a lesson activity itself. Maybe even within Koala Go and got to build that within the playground, for example, or just using cardboard and paper by ourselves and building that sort of thing in the class time itself. And when she starts enjoying those sort of activities, then maybe later on you can say, oh, well, remember in our last story, we made this cool model. How about you do that as a little homework task this time? And see if, you can start encouraging a small amount of that out of class stuff here and there. It can be tough. Also getting parents on board, I think, really helps as well. Like talk to parents about kind of spending time reading with their kids at home, trying to build it a bit more into their routine. Again, it very much depends how engaged the parents are in that, but that can help to some extent as well. Cool. Does that answer the question, or an idea anyway?
I think so.
Cool. Nice.
Yes, yes, it does. Thank you, Katie. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah, I'm not sure there's an easy answer to it though. Sorry, it's sort of trying to sort of gently encourage that out of class participation. Also, the idea I had before about having a reading club, like a group chat, can also help, because if they see other students are doing things outside of class and they're all commenting in the group chat, then they might think, oh, well, everyone else is writing book reviews and sharing pictures of their storyboards that they've made. Maybe I should do something too. That can also be a sort of gentle way to build on a bit of peer pressure, I guess, but in a slightly less
Katie,
formal way.
So, sorry to interrupt. There's another question from Juliet, who says, I work with an autistic child who is 13 and says he hates reading. He won't read out loud and he's currently being homeschooled. Any suggestions?
I wonder whether, again, it depends very much on the child. It's something that I think when it comes to, particularly when we're doing tutoring, very much adapting around the specific child and what they engage best with. Probably what I would try would be forget the actual text entirely. Build something like the picture I had earlier, like in Koala Go with the playground. Create some kind of something like this. And Koala Go is a great place for doing that. Or get them to make a model or something, all kinds of different ways of building something similar. But don't put any text on it whatsoever. And pick a story they already know, like a fairy tale, something they might be familiar with, or even a film that they like. Quite a lot of kids, maybe they're not into books, but they like to watch movies. So pick a movie that they're familiar with, and then get them to retell the story and act out and do the role play using a story they already know. And even if it's from a movie they watched, they've not done any reading yet. And then when you're doing that, maybe you can then start adding some little text boxes, put up some of those sticky notes and put some of the text of what they're saying. And the next thing you know, they've helped you rewrite the story, but without them realizing that they're even doing that. And then you go, wow, look, we've written this story together. Now, can you read it to me? And maybe that can be a way to get them to kind of try out a bit more of that reading. Again, it depends also on what they need to work on. Like if the challenge is like they need to build reading skills, then I think this could be a way to get them to sort of subtly get into the reading side of things. I'm not sure if that helps as an idea. Maybe. Also, again, trying different formats. I think some people don't like stories, and that's fine. Maybe they like non-fiction books instead. Try and mix and match different types of text that they could be reading. And particularly, they might have some like things they're particularly interested in. I had one kid who was absolutely obsessed with trains. He loved trains. Anything and everything about trains, he loved. Everything else, no interest whatsoever. So, if we could find a book that was about trains and had pictures of trains, and it was actually meant to be taking science classes with me. So we were trying to like link this into physics and these sort of topics. But if you could find out like something they're particularly interested in, and maybe find books that have that in common, could also be another approach.
Nice. Thank you.
Nice. Okay. Cool. So I think that was my kind of initial ideas of how to make reading that little bit more fun and engaging for kids, and then linking that into the storytelling and creative writing side. I wanted to move on a little bit just to talk about some of Abridge Academy's story lessons. But I'm going to show you a little bit. Don't worry if you don't want to buy Abridge Academy, that's fine. I just want to show this as an example of how the lessons work and what I use in my own classes. And I'll talk about some strategies that I use with these lessons as we go as well. But yeah, Abridge Academy, we recently launched a new stories course, which is currently got 36 lessons in it, and it's themed around traditional fables and fairy tales. These are aimed at kids with sort of beginner to pre-intermediate levels of English, and it's focusing mostly on reading skills, storytelling, and then also creative writing lessons as well. And this is something that some teachers are just using these as standalone lessons by themselves, or if they're teaching like more structured textbook style classes, or they're using the Abridge Academy core curriculum, they can use these as sort of a supplementary thing to add on some extra, slightly more interesting kind of practice with reading. Each story, there's 4 lessons for each of the stories. So for example, here we've got The Hare and the Tortoise. There's 2 reading versions, which is just at 2 different levels. And then there's another lesson that's focused on retelling the story. And it's essentially the same story, but without any text on it. They just got the pictures. These are picture books. So they've got all the pictures, and then there's a text box for them to write their own text, and little prompts you can pull out from the side with little questions to ask them to encourage them to think about what they might want to write. And then there's a twister tale version, which is where they are putting their own twist on the story and changing it in a different way. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about those. And if you want to, we can actually then spend some time looking at some examples. I think that's a little bit more useful than me just presenting all the time. But when it comes to guided reading lessons, again, there's 2 guided reading lessons for each story at different levels. These have obviously the text itself. There's also a focus on reading comprehension and discussion. So there's comprehension taking questions, more deeper discussion questions. There's particularly a bit of analysis of some of the morals and the meaning of fables. What can we learn from the story? How could you apply this to your own life? Like I think, let's look at the example here was, we've got the ant and the grasshopper, which is one of the traditional fables. And basically the grasshopper is super lazy, and the ant is preparing ahead for winter in this story. So the kids can talk about, you should think ahead. You shouldn't just live for the now, plan ahead for the future and work hard now. How does this help you? How can you apply it to your own life? Well, if you work hard in school now, that's going to help you in the future. So it kind of links in to things like that. There's also some review of key vocabulary and grammar. This is more relevant to ESL teachers, but could be useful for other students as well. You have the ability, by the way, using the tabs down the side to skip different sections of the text. So quite often with some students, I just skip the grammar part entirely. Like, you have some flexibility there. There's also creative activities and games that are built in, so you can have a little bit more fun without you having to spend ages planning and preparing these sort of materials. And then at the end, there's custom feedback where you can assess how well they've done against the key learning objectives and give them some personal feedback as well. So those are the guided reading lessons. Oh, I see a message in the chat. Can those also be saved or printed? So the lesson slides themselves, because they're all interactive, the stuff you can move on the screen and like quizzes and drag and drop activities and all that kind of thing, they can't be downloaded because they're not in a format that could be downloadable. So they're only available within the website. So within Koala Go, you'd open up the co-browser, and then you can access the website within the co-browser and open the lesson slides there. There are also, though, some printed materials. I'm going to jump ahead a bit in my presentation. Where's it gone? There's also a whole load of printed materials, and there's loads. There's like 15 to 20 per lesson, with loads of different kind of worksheets, like different versions of different worksheets. There's like a gap fill one retelling the story. There's analyzing characters, spotting the difference, all kinds of different printable worksheets. I'm not suggesting you do all of them with every student. I'm suggesting you go through and you pick and choose maybe 2 or 3 useful, relevant ones. And these can be printed. You can send it to your students to do as homework tasks. If you're teaching a large group, you might find that you want to send it to them to do as a worksheet during the class, and they can each then do it separately during the class time. If you're teaching in person, these could be printed as in-person worksheets. So there's a lot of printable resources that accompany all of the story lessons. Yeah, things like this one, actually. My kids really love the puppets. You can print them out and they can then act them out with the characters on their fingers and retell the story. It's quite cute. So yeah, all of these are included as well. I'll briefly tell you a little bit about the other types of lessons that are included in the stories curriculum. So the third lesson, so there's 4 lessons per story. Third lesson is retell the story. Retell the story is basically where you're given the main part is like this. So you're given the images from the story, and then there's this text box that then they can fill in with their own words here. And there's little tabs you can pull out from the side with questions to ask them. Depending on the level, there's different kinds of questions, and it's going to encourage them to then think about what they can write in the text box. They also start with doing a bit of analysis of the different characters and talking a bit more detail about that as well. And it's given the opportunity to work on sort of certain narrative writing skills, like for example, using adjectives and giving more detailed descriptions, that kind of thing, but without having to first plan out the story structure, because they've already got the story structure there for them. So it's kind of a stepping stone towards kind of writing your own stories, and it's focusing more on the storytelling and the descriptive skills and that side of things. And then at the end, once they've written their story, it then gives you an overview of the whole story as like it's not really a comic strip, but it's kind of like a layout like this, so they can see how the story kind of comes together with the text they've written automatically included in it. And kids just love seeing, like, they've written a book. Isn't that amazing? They love celebrating that. And then the final kind of lesson that's included are the twist the tale lessons. And this is where they put their own twist on the story and tell it in their own words. And this is good at building on those sort of creative narrative writing skills, but also having to plan out and structure the story. So they get given these different twists that you could put on the tale. So for example, here we've got the hare and the tortoise. And there's some different examples they could pick between, or they can make up their own twist. So maybe the tortoise was actually cheating, and he gave the hare a sleeping pill, and that's why the hare fell asleep. Or maybe they're best friends, and the hare just fell asleep because he wanted his friend to win, and it was actually being nice or something. So there's little small twists, and then how that could change what happens in the story. They have to then think a bit about it. So they do that. They analyze the characters a bit, think about what they're good at, what their personality is like, what kind of the challenge that they're facing is, or what the misconception that's going to be challenged in the story itself, and then think about what they're going to learn from the story.
Katie?
And then planning out the whole structure. Yep.
What age are they for, and which level of English? Are they decodable that the students read themselves?
Great question. So the age of the text, it does obviously depend on each individual student, but I would say these in general are aimed at sort of primary school level kids. So I would say kids aged around 5 to, at the oldest, 10. I wouldn't necessarily say teenagers have enjoyed some of these stories because they're kind of fairy tales and the like, but that would depend on their English level as well. And what was the other part of the question? Sorry. Are they decodable?
Right.
They are not decodable texts. These are intended to be more like early readers instead of decodable text. So it's sort of intended for kids who've already had a background in phonics. They've already built that ability to sort of do basic levels of reading, and this is more building on reading more, I guess. Well, I'm not sure authentic text is the right word, but you know what I mean, like ones that haven't been written to be just decodable words and the like. Yeah, you'll find though that the pre-A1 versions of the text are quite simple. So although they're still not necessarily fully decodable as such, there will still be some irregular words, like red words, whatever you want to call them. But they should be words that they'll be quite familiar with. So I'd recommend having a look at those as a sort of stepping point on from the standard decodable readers that you might have been doing previously. Yeah, we do have decodable text actually in the phonics curriculum, which is another part that's currently under a lot of development at the moment. But there are decodable texts included there, and those are starting with the very simple, the cat sat on the mat kind of stuff, and then building up. But yeah, these are kind of intended to be more like reading instead of phonics, if that makes sense. I just want to give a quick sort of celebration of some of the wonderful feedback we've had already from teachers. The stories course only launched in February. Yeah, January, February, about a month or two ago. It's very new. So this feedback has been very recent, and lots of teachers are trying out the lessons now. But yeah, teachers have already said that they really like them, which is always wonderful to hear. They like how fun and creative and interactive they are. And the students are really loving the lessons. So I've had some really wonderful feedback from teachers already, which is much appreciated. Okay. And before I wanted this to be like half an hour or so presentation, then we can jump in and actually look at some examples. Before we kind of move on to the actual looking at some real lessons, I just want to summarize a bit more about the ABridge Academy curriculum in general. So if you're new to ABridge Academy, ABridge Academy is basically a super interactive and engaging online digital learning experience for your students. So there's a whole bunch of lesson slides that are included in the curriculum. There's structured step-by-step curriculum for ESL students. And there's also then specialist courses focusing on debating, reading like these stories, writing skills, phonics, and so on. Some of the other reading things I haven't talked about in these slides, but I know, Xavier, you mentioned a bit earlier, things like reading news articles. There's also topical reading related to like science topics and the like. All of this is included in those specialist courses. And the idea is that for teachers, it means you wouldn't have to do any lesson planning. That's our goal. So everything you need is included. There's the lesson slides, there's automated feedback reports, lesson previews that you can send to students before the class, homework workbooks, flashcards, all of that is there for you. And there's a free tier to get you started. So no need to pay straight away. You can go to abridgeacademy.com and then sign up for free to get started. Especially for everyone joining us live today, we've also got a 50% off code for Koala users, Koala50. So make a note of that. If you're joining the free tier first, make a note of the code Koala50, because then when you do want to upgrade, which hopefully you are all amazed by the resources and then decide later on you want to upgrade, please remember to use that discount code. It gives you 50% off your first month with the code Koala50. I think, Xavier, did you just put the link in the chat?
I just put the coupon code, but I can also send the link if you want.
Sure, I've got the link here. I can put it there. And it's got your
Go for it. Nice
thing. Yeah, there we go. So there's a link in the chat that takes you straight to the checkout for the paid version. But if you want to just go to the free version, that's fine. You can do the free version first, but then remember that discount code when you upgrade. So yeah. I'll hand it over to you guys then. Any questions about what we looked at so far today? And we've also got some time then to dig in and have a look at some of the stories and the examples and things if you'd like to have a look at those in more detail. Did I talk too quickly and overwhelm everyone? I tend to do that. All good. Lots of questions in the chat. Juliet saying, can you access all parts of the course? Do you mean the lessons, Juliet?
Yeah, so I just wondered if you subscribe to the Abridge Academy curriculum, do you get access to the phonics course that you mentioned and the reading and any other parts as well?
Yes, so it's all in one membership. I deliberated a lot about this. Do we have like a whole bunch of different separate ones if people purchase separately? And it was too complicated to try and sort that out and people got confused. So it's one membership, includes everything. Yeah, the free version's got about 10% of the resources available for free. And then the paid version's just got all of it in one package. So yeah, and the paid version's $12 a month. So try to keep it affordable for teachers. Thanks. Chelsea saying, informative presentation. Thank you. Thank you for coming along. Thanks. Aaron saying, looks great so far. I'm a former VIP kid teacher, now dyslexia tutor. I'd love to use this with small groups for summer slide prevention and ELA instruction. Oh yeah, this could be really great if you're running something kind of more fun in the summer as such. I think kids really enjoy stories as a great sort of summer camp type thing. And certainly for like kids with dyslexia, for example, that reading focus is really important for them. So hopefully it gives them a bit more practice. Scope and sequence. So not for the stories course. They're intended to be more like a book you can dip in and out of, if that makes sense. There is for the phonics courses, it's currently being rewritten. If anyone here, by the way, wants to try out the new version of the phonics course, drop me a message or an email on the Contact Us page, because the new phonics course is currently in development at the moment, and we have a full scope and sequence all written out, which I can send to you, and several lessons that are in beta testing at the moment. So if you want to become a beta tester of the phonics course, let me know, and then you can get early access to those lessons as they are being redone at the moment. Sorry, I went off topic. Scope and sequence not available for the stories, but there is for some of the other courses. The stories are meant to be kind of very much dip in and out of, rather than being a sort of full structured course. Chelsea's asking, may we use it as an outschool? Yes. So with the Abridge Academy curriculum, you're allowed to use it in any live classes, online or in person. The only restriction is that you can't use them for outschool self-paced courses. So like where you've recorded a video of it and then you send it to students to do by themselves. And that's mostly just because those videos you then have access to forever, and it's sort of the curriculum design is a sort of membership program, and it becomes a bit complicated when people use them in asynchronous resources. So yeah, you can use it on Outschool for live classes, no problem at all. And same with any other platform. It includes a commercial use license. You can check the terms and conditions for all the details, but basically live class is no problem, just not asynchronous. You can send the recordings to people who were in attendance at a live class, that's fine. So sharing the recordings is fine, but it's meant to be for sharing recordings with people who are there in the live class. Julia's asking, how does the assessment work on Abridge? Could you ask what you're referring to there, Juliet?
Oh, I just I was having a look at your the free version recently, and I wondered how you do. I think on there in the first level that you get for free, there is an assessment on there that you can do with your students. Is that sort of suitable for any age and any level of English, or how would you use it? Is that what you should sort of do in the first lesson with your student before you go into any of these reading programs? Or
Yeah, so we actually have, if we go to the trial class, the first lesson, we had something called the placement test. Let me just check I'm sharing this screen. Is it showing? Here we go. So the placement test, I think, is what you're referring to there, which is kind of an initial assessment of students' level. And this is mostly aimed at sort of beginner to pre-intermediate level ESL students. So it's not yet covering all the different levels. It's something that as the core curriculum develops, there'll be more levels and things added. But yeah, it's a placement test rather than an ongoing assessment. And this is basically a quiz, and you work through it, the answer questions. It focuses on, well, a whole range of different skills, but mostly core vocabulary, grammar, reading comprehension, things like spelling kind of stuff, rather than in-depth writing. It's more for multiple choice type questions. But it gives you a rough idea of what level they're at, and then it tells you which trial class it would recommend, which you can then use the trial class for the rest of that first lesson. We've actually got a really in-depth trial class bootcamp available on the Abridge Academy YouTube channel, which I'd recommend having a look at, which works you through how to do the assessment and the trial classes, and also top tips for what to do in that first lesson. But yeah, the idea is that the placement test should take around 10 minutes or so to work through, and then the rest of that time, so 20 minutes or so at the most, would be spent then doing the trial class, which is here on the left. Does that help?
yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, so and for the trial class, it's about what, half an hour in total, is it, that you would do for the trial?
That's what I would recommend.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Cool. Any other questions, or should we dig in to have a look at some of the actual stories themselves? Look at the chat. Owen's saying, I love that dipping in and out option. Yeah, the stories are meant to be very flexible rather than a sort of fixed order you have to follow. Okay, I think we've answered all the questions. So have a look at some of the actual stories then. Is it sharing the screen? No, it's not. Yes, it is. There we go. Okay. So within the Abridge Academy curriculum, we've got all the different stories. There's actually, let me go back. Let me go back to the main dashboard. So when you sign up, whether you're a free tier member or whether you're a paid member, you have your member dashboard, which is where you access all of the resources from. There's a step-by-step curriculum, which is an ESL curriculum building comprehensively all the different skills. We're going to move on from that, though, to the expansion courses, which is more relevant to today's topic on reading, storytelling, creative writing. So there's the stories here, which is aimed at sort of beginner to intermediate levels. There's also a few other reading courses you'll find. Like, for example, there's a more in-depth guided reading program about the book The Little Prince, which is very popular. That's a series of, I want to say it's 7 lessons, which work you step by step. And that's a great way of moving on to, say, chapter books. This is a great sort of introduction to that, because it breaks it down into sort of more manageable chunks for students with cute pictures and all that sort of stuff, and all the usual interactions and projects and things. And then further down, we've also got this non-fiction writing one, which, to be honest, needs a lot of work. Don't look too much at that one. And then there's the English news course, which is very popular, and that's got a lot of news articles. And again, it's focusing on that reading comprehension and then linking into sort of more in-depth discussion and analysis of interesting stories from the news. So those are the sort of reading ones that you might particularly want to look into. Should we have a look at the stories, or does anyone have a burning desire to have a look at one of the other ones?
I think the Little Prince one sounds interesting because it's a famous book, isn't it, that lots of people have heard of.
Yes, yeah, this is one of my favorites actually. I think it's a really cute story, and it's a short guided reading program at 7 lessons. There we go. And the first one's included for free, by the way. So if you're on a free plan, you can always, and it's the same for most of the courses, there's always at least 1 or 2 lessons at the beginning that are available for free. And me, oh, I'll go full screen on Zoom. Zoom doesn't like full screen, I seem to remember. It's okay, we'll just zoom in. Here we go. This is why Koala is so much better than Zoom, I'm just saying. Right, so we've got the lesson slides, and I'm not going to necessarily go through the whole lot, but basically with these, they learn a few key words. And these, by the way, there's underneath links to the lesson preview where they can learn and review the words before the class. And then here you're going to review the words. So a person aged over 18 who's not a child, hopefully they'll think, oh, that's an adult. There we go, there's the answer. So you can just check the new words. And then we jump straight into the story. So it's very focused on the text itself. And I think this is one you can move. Oh yeah, here we go. A little bit of interactivity. They can move the mouse into the snake's mouth and it gets eaten. My kids love silly things like that. But yeah, small little bits of interactivity as you read the text. So they read the story. I seem to remember there's a couple of slides of story, and then I think there's an activity or some questions. There we go. So they read a little bit of story, then there's some kind of comprehension checking questions, and then some that link into things a bit further. So it builds on from like simple questions, you know, what's this? What happens at this point in the story? What did they say? And then linking it to them themselves, like what hobbies did you enjoy when you were younger? How about now? Like how have things changed? And I think there's like another sort of new words, story. Oh, this story is a little bit strange when you actually start reading it. It's a very odd story. So it's about this guy who, the little prince, and he lands, like crash lands in the desert, and then they're drawing pictures of the sheep, and it turns out it's all about the imagination. He's imagining the sheep. The best sheep is the one at the end, which is actually just a box, and then you imagine the sheep inside the box, and then it can be perfect. Sorry, that's not a very good explanation of the story. If you know the story, it makes more sense. And then there's all these questions, and then it links into more of the deeper kind of meaning of the story. So this story, the first part is all about the importance of imagination and creativity. And basically the prince, like, he kind of discovers that adults are all boring and they've forgotten how to be creative. They've got no imagination. And this is actually a repeating thing that comes up at later points in the story as well, where there's some like accountant type guy who just does numbers or something, or maps. Can't remember now. Anyway, and so they talk about the importance of imagination. How can you be more imaginative? Should we do art? These sort of questions. It's going to think about the meaning. And I think there's a project or a little game, Pictionary. And again, that's the idea of creativity, drawing a picture. I don't know. And another little game. And I think we end with a project, yeah, a diary entry, and they've got to pretend they're the pilot of the plane that crashed. Write a diary entry and about this boy you met, what happened, you know, and sort of retelling the story a bit in their own words and from a different perspective. There's different tasks in each of the lessons, by the way. So that one was a diary entry. One of the other ones is like making a poster advertising something. There's all kinds of little projects. So I skimmed through that rather quickly, but I don't know if that gives you an idea of sort of the Little Prince course and what's included. My students really love this one. It's quite cute. But yeah. Any questions on this one?
How many, so how long would it take to go through a whole book? Would that be a series of lessons, or you do one book per lesson?
Yeah, this one, The Little Prince, is a series of lessons. There's 7 lessons. You can see in the sidebar here, there's 7 lessons that basically review the main sections of the story. It kind of breaks it into smaller chapters. And each one focuses on a different sort of theme and a different different discussion points and the like. So this will be definitely a series of 7 lessons you would need to do for this book. But the other stories in the main stories curriculum, they're just one-off stories. Although there's the option to have, say, the guided reading one. Kind of what I was saying at the beginning about what I quite like doing is we have like one lesson doing the reading of the story, and then another lesson where they retell the story, and then a third lesson where they then write their own story inspired by that story. So there's some flexibility in terms of that type of thing with the other stories. But yeah, The Little Prince is meant to be a 7-lesson course as such. Does that help?
Yep, that's helpful. And would they be about 30 minutes each?
Yeah, so this one, they're actually quite long. So I found the original plan was these meant to be 30-minute lessons. I'm going to be honest with my students. it tends to overrun a lot. We've ended up just making them an hour-long lessons and having more of a chat and enjoying more of the games and more of the project kind of time. So the original plan, they were meant to be 25-minute lessons, and they're a bit longer. But it's kind of adaptable, and it depends on the student as well as to how quickly they get through things and what they want to explore in more detail. Cool. Right. Any other questions about this one? Or we can jump back and look at some of the other stuff as well. Okay, should we go back and have a look at the I've got a few other things to have a look at. I can show you some of the story lessons, like the fables and fairy tales kind of stories. Or I'm happy to show you things like the news lessons, which are sort of more reading focused as well, but they're like a more advanced level. The stories are quite aimed at beginners, whereas these news ones are sort of upper intermediate to advanced. Yeah. Any preferences?
Might be interesting to see some of the things for the older learners,
Mhm.
if you have older students too.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I would say, by the way, the stories, if you want to join the free plan, you can check out 4 of them are available for free. So maybe rather than me going through those today, you can go check those ones out. And also, showed you a few screenshots and examples in the slides earlier, so hopefully that gave you some ideas of that. So yeah, let's have a look at those English news ones then. So these are kind of, the news topics are not necessarily like breaking news kind of topics. They're more something that you can sort of read and digest a little bit more flexibly as such. But for example, this one here is about eating less meat saves the environment. And basically, some research was published saying that it was calculating the greenhouse gas emissions of different diets. And this is quite a debatable topic somewhat. It's quite good for that deeper discussion, perhaps. So yeah, with the news lessons, they usually start with a quick review of some key vocabulary. And again, it's a bit like we saw on the Little Prince, as a sort of pop up with a few, like a definition, and then you can click on it to reveal the actual correct word. And the underneath, by the way, there is the article, and it has the keywords highlighted in the article for them to review before the class. So the idea is that kids should turn up to class having already read the article and looked up any unfamiliar words, and done that sort of exercise beforehand. So they review a few new words, then they read the text. And it's been rewritten in a format that's suitable for this particular level, which was B1 level, okay, this low intermediate level. So it's been rewritten at a level that should be appropriate for students who are learning English as a second language. But I've taught these lessons with students who've got English as a first language as well. So it's flexible because it's more focused on the comprehension than on vocabulary or that sort of thing. So yeah, they read the text. Sometimes there's sort of data or evidence or something that links to the news story. It depends on the topic. And that was a bit of a graphic picture, actually. Maybe I should change that one. And then there's discussions. They talk about the text and link it to their own lives. So what food do you eat? Do you think about the carbon footprint of your food? Going to be honest, I never used to. I just thought, food is food. Doesn't really matter, but it turns out there's quite a big difference if you look at some of that data earlier, to get them to think about things in a slightly different way. And then it links in, this particular one has more of a debate at the end here, and they can sort of categorize the arguments into for or against. This one. So they can sort of argue for or against and share their own opinions. I mean, this particular one was about being vegan, which is quite a controversial topic. So, they could say, okay, maybe it's more healthy perhaps, but actually, is it really that healthy? Is it actually better for the environment? Because if you analyze, some vegan food is actually a lot worse for the environment than the sort of meat alternative. So there's a lot of discussion and debate you can have around this topic. And then that's the end of this one. So yeah, I'm not sure that gives you a quick overview of the contents, but basically you have, I was going to zoomed in, it looks a bit ugly. But basically you start off with some new words, then you read the text, then you talk about the text. And then there's often some kind of either in-depth discussion or analysis or debates, or sometimes there's small writing exercises. It depends on the lesson. Yeah.
Katie?
Yeah.
Do you use these for one-on-one classes or groups? And do the students read the whole text out loud, or do you read some of it too?
Great question. I actually use these ones with group classes. You can use them with one-on-one classes, but I think because there's a lot more focus on the sort of discussion and like sharing your own opinions and that kind of thing, it works really well in the group class environment because it gets everyone talking about stuff. But I mean, it's flexible. You can use it for either. But yeah, I would say works particularly well with the group classes. And sorry, what's the other part of the question? You said something
Um,
else.
Yes, whether you read some of the text or whether you let your students read them.
I usually get the students to take turns reading each section of the text. I teach small group classes, so we're thinking like 4 or 5 students or something in the group. So it's not like there's going to be huge numbers of them. So they can each read a paragraph of the text or something.
Yeah.
And in that way, we've worked through it. And hopefully they're also building some of their listening skills as well while reading certain sections themselves.
I love the debate topics that are really,
Yeah, we actually have a whole course dedicated just to debating,
yeah.
which is even more debating focused. Loads of debate topics. I love debating as well, and again, that's very much a group class kind of topic. But my students have a lot of fun with the debates and the news articles and things like that.
Yeah, and you're right. It teaches them how to listen as well, and teaches logic and respect and lots of soft skills as part of it, not just reading and writing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's depending on the students, they have very different things they need to focus on. Some really want to focus on, say, speaking skills. So the debating is great for getting to speak more kind of confidently themselves, and maybe more extended sentences, giving reasons and that kind of stuff. Other students need to focus more on, say, the sort of critical thinking or analyzing data and using evidence to back up their arguments. And again, debating is fantastic for that side of things. And yeah, there's a whole different ways you can kind of adjust how you teach the lessons to focus on slightly different skills. I've had one student in particular wanted to work on academic writing, and particularly sort of things like persuasive text, for example. And although debating is kind of meant to be a speaking thing, in reality, debating is just speaking out loud a persuasive text in a way. It's the same sort of sentence structures, the same sort of way of structuring arguments and using evidence and data and that type of stuff is also relevant for that particular context of writing a persuasive text, or argumentative text, that kind of thing. So we actually use the debating lessons, but instead of getting her just to speak all the time, we got her to actually write it on the whiteboard. Again, Koala Go is great for that because you've got the whiteboard right there and you can just type in and edit the text together and collaborate on things.
How do you find those debate ideas? Those are pretty good. I'm reading on your screen right now.
Thanks. Some of these are actually recommended by fellow teachers. So if anyone's got any ideas of debate topics they'd like to see, same for things like the news articles, you read something interesting in the news, let me know. All the stories, kids have got a favorite story, tell me. Then a lot of these do come from fellow teachers. They reach out and say, Katie, I really need a debate topic. Like, I think it was Grant who suggested, should children do chores? So I thought, that's a great idea, I'll make that one. And some of them are just the usual kind of popular topics. Should kids wear school uniform? I know the kind of stuff that are very stereotypical debate topics you have when you're doing kind of debating in school. So there's a whole range of different options.
So when you do the one about whether children should do chores or not, what do your students say?
Actually, I was very surprised. I thought my students would be quite adamant that children should not do chores. But some of them do have a sort of balanced opinion, which is good to see.
Nice.
Yeah, it's difficult. I think something that makes a good debate topic is a topic that doesn't have a clear right or wrong answer.
Yeah, exactly.
Which actually can be really hard to find because a lot of topics, things like, I don't know, should we invest more money in solar power or something? I mean, it's green energy is kind of an obvious topic we should spend the money on. I mean, you could argue that actually maybe we should spend the money on something else. Is healthcare more important than energy? I don't know. I guess it's still debatable things, but some topics are very much like too one-sided. So it's quite hard to find good debate topics, but yeah.
Nice.
Great. Any other questions? I think there's a few things in the chat. What's in the chat? Oh, Aaron asked, how long is the lesson? Was that about the? I lost track.
I think it was around the end of The Little Prince.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So Little Prince was meant to be in 25 minutes, but I'm going to be honest, I usually teach it in like an hour-long class because my kids like to talk too much. And the debating and the news reading lessons are kind of, again, it's flexible. Depends how much in depth you want to work on them, but they are intended more for hour-long classes. That would be my suggestion for the length. But I don't know, it's one of those things that teachers always say, oh, does this have to be a 25-minute class? And I'm going to be honest, a lot of lessons, even if it's meant to be 25 minutes, if you're then going to do a sort of more detailed, they're going to write up a detailed review or things like I said, that student who wanted to do writing around the debate topics, that is then a whole another huge chunk of time that gets spent on developing those skills as well. So yeah, it depends on the student, depends on how you like to teach, what you want to focus on, depends if it's individual student or group class, it's flexible. I would also say the lessons are designed such that you don't have to do every single exercise in the lesson. So sometimes, like quite a lot, I skip some of the slides. If I know my students already know a grammar point, there's no point spending time doing a grammar slide on something they already know. So I do skip some sections or spend more time on other sections. It's flexible. I think we're good. We're right on time. Look at that.
Yeah.
I never finish on time.
No, it's rare. It's very rare.
Nice.
Thank you, Katie. This is just so
yeah.
cool.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you so much for inviting me to this. It was really great chatting to everyone. And hopefully it's given people an idea of the reading, the storytelling, the creative writing, all the kind of cool things you can do in class. And if you want to check out Abridge Academy, don't forget to have a look at the link that's, I can put it in the chat again if you want.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, have a look at the link in the chat. And that gives you a 50% off your first month with the discount code Koala50. So yeah, hope you guys check it out. And if you've got any questions at all following on from today, feel free to reach out to me. If you go on the Abridge Academy website, there's a contact us form, and you can just fill out the form and it sends me an email, and then I'll get back to you. So if you've got any questions on anything, feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to help.
Sounds good, Katie. Thank you so much for all this amazing work that you're sharing with us.
Cool. Thank you so much. Thanks.
See you. Bye, everyone. Take care.
Yeah, bye.